Can you guess which city is Europe's cocaine capital? Considering how some England fans behave when they're overseas for football tournaments, I wouldn't be surprised if your first thought was London. But the answer is actually a little closer than you might think. This year, for the second year running, Antwerp was named the biggest consumer of cocaine in Europe. But before you start judging, Brussels isn't far behind. This city is number 6 on the list. Today, I'm going to talk about a radical proposal to deal with the fallout of all of this cocaine use. And it's one that might sound a little counterintuitive at first, which is a completely legal drugs market. But first, let's explore why Belgium consistently ranks so high on the European cocaine league table. First of all, the Port of Antwerp has historically been a huge entry point into Europe for South American drug cartels. Last year, 116 tons were seized there, a record amount, which was a 5% increase on the previous year. So essentially, the drug is just becoming more and more available every single year. Secondly, the stuff coming off these boats and making its way to the streets is incredibly pure, meaning you get more bang for your buck, which has helped to democratize the use of the drug and increase demand. So what are the consequences of all of this? Well, besides more people staying up until 4 a.m. on a Friday and chatting absolute rubbish, both drug-related deaths and drug-related violence are on the rise. Here in Brussels, but also throughout Europe and much of the rest of the world. I'm sure many of you in here will have read about the spate of shootings over the last couple of years in Brussels between rival drug gangs battling out for territory. Last year, there were 7 drug-related homicides in Brussels and 131 injuries. And on a federal level, police now have to dedicate 25% of their annual investigative budget to drug crimes. So, what's the solution? Go harder on prohibition? Perhaps. But even if you were to arrest every single drug dealer working in Brussels today, I'd bet that by this time next week, another 1,000 would have popped up to take their place, because there's simply too much money to be made. Despite the trillions spent globally on drug enforcement, a paper last year from the International Drug Policy Consortium showed that more people worldwide are using drugs than ever before. In cities like London and Brussels, you can buy a bag of cocaine quicker than you can a pizza. And drug dealers around the world have now automated the buying process to the point where you go on an app like Telegram or WhatsApp, pick from a whole menu of drugs, be it cocaine, ecstasy, magic mushrooms. You pay in cryptocurrency, and those drugs are either delivered to your home or to a pickup point for you to go and collect, like they're an Amazon parcel. 2022 stats from the UN showed that cocaine production hit a record high that year. And as for the people running the show, every time a cartel kingpin is taken out by authorities, there's almost always a horrendously violent street war before someone else just pops up to take its place. So, what can we do next? A good first step might be decriminalization, so not punishing people for using drugs. By switching from a criminal justice approach to one that prioritizes public health, we could funnel some of the money away from law enforcement into improving treatment and harm reduction services. This would also alleviate the burden on the criminal justice system, so police could spend more time investigating crimes that, let's face it, are more important than people using drugs. And fewer people would go to jail, which would help to break the cycle of marginalization that so often accompanies drug use. But the problem with this system is that it still leaves control of the drug market in the hands of criminal gangs, which is where so much of that violence stems from. And the only way to deal with this problem, according to experts like Steve Rolls at Transform and Tom DeCourt at Belgium's Ghent University, is to go one step further and legalize all drugs. Now, this is obviously a fairly controversial and deeply complicated issue. But let me play devil's advocate for a moment and just look at a few of the potential benefits we might find from taking on this system. First, organized crime. The international drug trafficking market is estimated to be worth somewhere around $500 billion a year. And all of that money is being handled by criminals. You take that money away from them, and you take away so much of the power they wield and so much of the harm they're able to inflict. So a legal market would deal a massive blow to organized crime. Secondly, the legitimate economy. That $500 billion could do a lot of good if it was taxed and funneled into the right places. And that's just the sales figures. You know, there's also money to be saved on law enforcement and imprisonment, and further potential economic growth from job creation in cultivation, distribution, and production. Finally, health. There's no getting around the fact that most drugs aren't very good for you, but the health argument for a legal market is threefold. First off, by subjecting currently illegal drugs to the same rigorous testing standards as the pharmaceutical industry, you could theoretically end up with a much safer product. People would know how strong a drug is before using it, and they would know that it's not been cut with anything nasty or unintentionally mixed in with something else from a dealer's supply. Secondly, health experts could offer tailored harm reduction advice to each individual user at the point of purchase. And lastly, you could theoretically impose limits on how much of any one drug someone could buy within a specific time span. So that might be 2 ecstasy pills per month rather than as many as you want, whenever you want, as is currently the case. The big question here is whether legalization would increase or decrease use. And I think really this comes down to how much people pay attention to the health warnings, as they are increasingly doing for smoking, or whether they ignore them completely, as many do for alcohol. But I think we can pretty conclusively say that prohibition isn't stopping anyone from using drugs. And the war on drugs isn't only failing, it's actively making the situation worse in many cases. So while it might sound like a radical proposal, I think it's fair to say that less drug-related violence, more money in the public purse, and a bigger focus on health over criminalization, particularly for the most vulnerable people in society, would be a huge improvement on the current situation. As Brussels' experience with rising cocaine consumption and drug violence has shown, the war on drugs is simply not fit for purpose. Clearly, it's time to try something new.